G'day, welcome to Pay It Forward. Today I have a really sweet and tiny little pattern for you all. This is a little Yorkie that I've had sitting in my pattern box for absolutely years, and he's been begging to come out. So here he is all ready for you. I've got your free pattern ready for you. You just need to find that link, and that is in the description box below. I'll also put it number 1 in the comments for you so it's easy for you to find, and you'll be able to then print out your free pattern templates. Now when you go to do that, make sure you set your printer to be printing at actual size, and you'll find that your pattern pieces will be absolutely spot on. I always also put a little measuring guide on your templates so you can check that your pattern pieces are right. I also include all seam allowances in all of my patterns, makes it nice and easy. So who's ready to start making my little sweet Yorkie? So a quick up close look at our little Yorkie here, and you can see made up very simply in felt. You can make up a portion of the body in fabrics if you like, in a print, very simply put together with that little button head joint. So let's go ahead and see what we're going to need. Let's start by having a look at our materials and requirements. So we begin with our 2 side body pieces. I'm making this one entirely out of felt. Now you can make the body section, just the body section, out of fabric if you like, and that could work really well, because if you had some little coloured prints, very tiny little prints, in Yorkie colours, that could look really pretty. You could alternatively, of course, I'm going to be making my Yorkie in sort of those traditional colours, but you could make little pinks and florals and that sort of thing would look equally as nice. But I'm going for just the black on the sides of that body, and this is felt, which is interfaced with my Fusion Woven cotton interfacing. It's a medium weight, and we do need that to be interfaced. So you've got those 2 pieces there. Then you've got the center front of that little dog, and then I'm bringing the gold into it. So again, I've got my felt, and that one is also interfaced. On the base of that one, we're going to be adding the underneath piece, the little gusset that goes in there, and I'm matching that up to the gold, also interfaced. Once that is all put together, we have a base section that we add, and that is actually for our 2 little side rear feet. Now these 2 pieces have to be made in felt, and they have fusible webbing applied. And the reason for that is that we do a little bit of fusing with this one, so that's really for stability, so make sure you add that. And I've got that in that same gold colour. And for the base, we're going to need a support that makes that little bottom sit nice and flat. Now if you have a 50mm wooden disc, joint disc, by all means use that, which is what I'll be using. Alternatively, you can cut one out. You've got your template there, cut one out of mat board. I usually cut 2 pieces of mat board and glue them together. So either way, that will work. And then we go on to the head. So making the head, I've gone for, you're going to need a contrast in this to show up those face pieces. So my 2 head pieces are cut from the deeper sort of a gold tan, and they have fusible webbing applied to the back. And we leave that paper on. It's extremely important that we leave that paper on for now. And added to that, we're going to have our little front muzzle face detail. And then you can cut that one in a colour that is gold like your front, and you see that it will show up there, and it wouldn't if we just use the same felt colours together, it won't show up. And I am trying to keep that Yorkie colour. You will also need your tiny little template cut from felt in black for the nose, and we've got 2 little ear pieces, and they also have fusible webbing applied, and they just bring some colour into the project there. And we're also going to need a little bow for the top. Now I'm making my little Yorkie after I actually had a beautiful Yorkie, and his name was Teddy Bear, and so I'm making my little boy Yorkie, and my Yorkie always just had a plain red bow in his top knot, so I'm going to keep with that. So I've cut that little piece. I've given you that template, but of course the top of that head with that little bow, you really could add anything, and you could really add some beautiful little diamante, little tiny bows, whatever you like, any kind of trim or notion. We're also going to need some eyes, and I have tiny little doll buttons, very small little doll buttons, and they will tuck in there nicely into position. And we will also need a button, a nice flat button, preferably 2-hole, for the back of that head. That's how we join that head on. So aside from that, we will need some polyester filling, and we will need some clear craft glue. You will need your extra strong threads and a couple of or embroidery threads, but you do need your extra strong thread for sewing and construction. I'm also going to be using some 8-ply pearl thread there for some of my blanket stitching. So that's about it. So to begin with, let's start on the body this time. Get that body all made. I'm going to start with the 2 side body pieces that we've got here, and our first step is to put right sides together. Now the seam allowance throughout this pattern is really quite tiny. It's no larger than 4 millimeters. So what we're going to do is pop those edges together. You can use pins or clips, whatever you like, and we're going to be sewing what is the center back seam all the way down to here. So from that top edge all the way down to here, and it is, as I said, a 4 millimeter seam. I like to sew that seam 2 times for strength, and do make sure that you're back and forth at the start and the finish. There we go. So that gives us the nice back line of our little dog. So do push that one through and roll out that seam while you can and while you have access to it, but we'll pop it back the other way. So now we're going to take our center gusset piece here, and you should have marks made on your pattern pieces. And what we're going to do is push that top seam nice and open and flat. You'll need to do it down the base as well. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to pin this center front gusset into place. So what we do is put our pin through in our seam allowance, straight through and straight through that seam at the top there. Make sure it is going straight through that seam, and push that pin head all the way down, and then all we have to do is pin that one into place. I like to take my pin through both sides and then flip it over, turn over the other side and take up a little bit of that fabric. It's just a 3D way of pinning that makes everything so much easier. Through both layers, flip it over, take up a little of that fabric on the underside, and then all you have to do is line it up all the way down to that little toe, and same on the other side. Get that one all pinned into place. Now what I like to do once I've done that, I like to sew with an overcasting stitch, just a tacking stitch. I will stitch that little gusset temporarily into place before I take it to the machine, because that way nothing will move on the machine. I can remove all of my pins, and it makes it so much easier, because it's important that this little gusset is really lined up well. So I'm going to get that one tacked into place, and then I will take it to the machine and stitch that one, and I do sew that one 2 times. This is how your front gusset should look once you've got that all stitched in. You can see my overcasting stitch all around there first, and then my two machine stitching lines. I've gone ahead and removed my tacking stitch just from the foot section on each side, so that I can flatten out those seams. So they're all ready for us to put in that base. So our next step is to take our funny looking little gusset piece and what's hanging on there, and we're going to pin that one into place. Now you've got a mark at the center front there on your gusset and a mark at the center front here. So just as we did before, we're going to line up those 2 centers pop a pin through at that seam allowance of 4mm again. I take it through both layers, flip it over and push that pin head all the way down. And now what we're going to do is we're just going to fit that little foot in. You see it will fit that curve, and just pin it in perhaps right on that toe. And what you need to do is follow that one all the way around and line it up to match up with that bottom curve there. It's probably easier to see that way. And we get that all pinned into place. Make sure that you're working on the gusset side. Don't turn it over and work on this side. So I'm going to get that one all pinned into place. You can see that it will just fit in nicely there. And then we're going to stitch with you can do some of this on the machine, but the top section we're going to have to do with a stab back stitch. So let me get it pinned into place and tacked into place, and I'll show you that stitch. Okay, so you can see that little base piece. I've had it all pinned and overcast in with my tacking stitch. I'm actually going to sew that whole piece in by hand because I just find it's easier. It's pretty quick once you get going on that stab back stitch. So I've now got my extra strong thread, which is what you need to sew a stab back stitch. I do have a video that shows you how to sew this stitch. I'll put the link up the top there for you so you can have a look at that if that helps you. But basically it's a linked back stitch where we go right through both layers. So I've started my first stitch here and we come in from behind. So I'm sewing at my 4mm seam allowance, bringing my needle through and going back into the hole that I just came out of, which is what makes it linked. Make sure you keep those stitches nice and small because it's your actual seam. So travel along a little further, coming through from the back, and then we're going to go back into that hole that we just came out of. So we're taking our needle all the way through each time, which is with that stabbing motion. So again, one more, through all the layers from behind and back into that hole. So you can see that seam is just like you'd sewn it on a sewing machine. It's sewn back and front and it's completely linked. So I will just continue around the whole outside of that shape, making sure that I really anchor in that front section, and make sure you really anchor those sides as you go. If you want to, you can just back stitch in this front curve section, which is a bit tricky, and you could just sew those little side pieces on the machine, but I just figure I'm already threaded up, so I'll do it all. So that completes the sewing on this section of our body here, and you can see I've just turned that one through. I've gone ahead and rolled out all of those seams so everything's nice and rounded, and you've got your basic little Yorkie body. So our next step is to fill that body with our polyester filling. Now I'm using my forceps, and there's a couple of things to remember when filling this body. First of all, this top section here, which I'm going to fill first, this is a section where we're going to be joining the head on through with a button. So we sort of keep that in mind and keep that section quite flat, packed very, very firm, but flat rather than rounded. So we get that all packed in there. Now, if you have a wool felting needle, which is a needle which is used for wool felting, sculpting, this is really handy because you might have seen in my videos before that I use it to pack those fibres in, and it packs everything down nice and tidy and really firm, and it means you can get into little tight areas like these front feet here. So what you want to do is pack that little body really nice and firm right up until just below the edge here. And as you do that, make sure that you're keeping it all nice and flat. We want a nice flat surface. And remember, we're going to be adding our disc in there. So everything needs to sit nice and flat. And by the same token, try and keep this front section also nice and flat. And that's where this needle is going to come in really handy. So keep everything nice and flat across the base here. I'm going to get that one done and show you how that looks. Okay, so there you can see that little body all filled out really firm there. Flip that one over, and I've just used my felting needle to keep all that section flat. If you can see what I mean, I've tucked all of that, all those fibres in there, and I've slipped my little disc that I've got there in. Now it is a snug fit, it needs to be a snug fit, and we're not wanting to pull this one in all the way down to that centre. We just want that disc to be covered around the edge because we're adding our extra little felt cover. But the way to tuck it in is straight in through this, pointing towards those front feet section, and then you'll ease it in, and you can see that you can pull it in all the way around it. Now you can also see that I've gone ahead and I've sewn with a doubled strand of my extra strong thread. I've sewn a running stitch all the way around that edge, starting from the back here, left the tail ends hanging so that I can tie it off all the way around to there. So I've tied my first knot, and once your disc is in, you simply need to pull that one in, and it will pull in, and as it does, it pulls in all of your stuffing nice and taut, and you'll have a lovely sleek little body shape there on the base. So what you need to do is keep that tension up and knot that off at least 4 times and snip those thread ends. But you can see exactly how flat that base is. Your little front section will curve up a little, but that's the look that we're after. So now I have that one tied off, and we can put that one aside. We need to get the little base section ready, which has the 2 rear feet and the little tail. So what I've done is, you remember it had our fusible webbing paper on the back. I've just removed that paper and I've put wrong sides together because we're not turning this one through, and I've just clipped the back there. I've got everything lined up well. The 2 sections we're first going to stitch are the 2 back feet. Now I've come in between the layers there. I'm using my extra strong thread for this. You can use pearl thread if you like, or embroidery thread. If you're using just stranded cotton, I would use 2 strands. So I'm just going to start what will be a tiny little blanket stitch. Now I'll add the link up the top there for you if you haven't sewn a blanket stitch before. It's very straightforward. We just go through all of the layers with our needle, keeping our stitches nice and small. You go through all the layers and you bring your needle out through your loop, thread loop each time. See, that's coming through the loop, and pull that one down. I'm using black because I really want to outline these little feet. You can coordinate it if you like, through the loop each time, keeping those stitches nice and even. And you can see that the only section I'm going to sew at this point is just the little back feet to there. So just a little lower to here, and then match it up on the other side, and that's going to allow us just to add a tiny little bit of filling in the front of those toes before we take this one, and then we're going to be fusing it together with the iron, because remember we've got that fusible webbing on the back there. So I'm going to get both of those little feet stitched into place, and then we're going to add a little bit of filling. Once you have those feet, those 2 foot sections stitched with your blanket stitch, you can go ahead and do what I've done there. I've just used my forceps and I've just tucked in a tiny amount of filling. You can see it's just clumped out a little bit there, but not beyond the end. Because what we're going to do now is we're going to take this one to the iron, and we're going to press the rest of those sections together so that it's fused together. Because we've got our fusible webbing in there. So you can test it out if you like. Just sit your little dog on that section there to check that your little feet have got enough fill in them and not too much. Otherwise, if you put too much in, they will stick straight up. So that's what I'm going to do. Take it to my iron and press the rest of this section flat. I now have that base plate all fused together, and you can see I've gone ahead and sewn the same blanket stitch just around the tail section now. So now we add it to the body, and I have added some clear craft glue. You can see that all over the base there, ready to attach. Now all you need to do is line it up to sit on the base there, and remember that the tail goes off to the side. So if you look at it from the top, you can see that the tail, don't line it up with the tail here. The tail pulls off to the side, and you want to make sure that those two little feet are equal on each side. Once you've got that all in place and you're happy with that, it's just a matter of pressing that down into place. You can throw a couple of pins through if you like. We really just want to push that all nice and flat. And we're going to set that one aside to dry. We need it perfectly dry before we do a little bit of a blanket applique stitching around it. That glue is now dry, so I can go ahead and sew my blanket applique stitch, which is what I'm going to use. And you can see that the sections I'm going to sew are just either side of those two curves there and just along the front. So the little tail will be nicely held in place, and those feet. So what I've done is I've just taken my needle in, I've got a knot in the end, I'm using my 8-ply pearl thread here, and I've just hidden that knot in between the layers, and I'm going to take my first stitch. So I'm going through all of the layers, and I'm coming out right on the edge of that body there, taking up some of that body fabric and bringing my needle through the loop, and that will join this base piece to that side body piece. So keeping my stitches nice and small again, making sure that I'm going through all the layers and taking up some of that side body. A bit hard to see that I'm using black, but it does need to be well blended. So just bringing my needle out through the loop each time, just like a blanket stitch, only we're following the edge of something. Just catching that one each time. You can see that's going to secure that well all the way around that base edge. So I'm just going to continue on with those pieces and around the front there, and that base piece will be nicely secure in place. There you can see that's what my little underside looks like on my little dog. If you have any problems with stitching this section here, perhaps use your curved needle. It helps you tuck in and under there. So what you should end up with is a nice flat surface, and there we have our little Yorkie body with our tail and rear legs. Our front section is indicating that our Yorkie has a full skirt, so sitting down. So while the temptation might be there to put a couple of claws in, that's really not the look we're going for. We're going for a full coat sitting down there. It's all about illusion. So we can put that one aside now. That's ready. We can move ahead and start making that lovely little face. So you take one of your front head pieces, and remember we've got the paper still on. So we've left our fusible webbing applique paper on, but we've removed the backing paper from those ear pieces and from this front muzzle piece. So now when we go and press these into place, that backing paper that's still on the back there will stop it from sticking to your ironing board. And that might sound like that's crazy. Who would do that? I have done that, so I've done it several times. And so please remember, keep that backing paper on for now. So we're going to take that one there. Now the placement of those little ear pieces, you can see, it just give yourself just enough room to do a little blanket stitch around, and it's quite lined up with that line across there. And also this muzzle section, it lines up with the top of the head, so that's pretty straightforward. So go ahead and get those pressed into place with a hot iron and a protective cloth. Now once you've done that, you just need to take it to your machine, or you could sew it by hand. I'm going to do mine on the machine. With a straight stitch in a coordinating thread, I'm going to stitch around that each of those ear pieces, and also around those edges. Don't worry about this edge here or this one here, because this is going to be a seam. but just those pieces that are showing on the head. So around these sections, right around up to the top. A nice tiny straight stitch right close to the edge, I find, is the best one for that. So we will get that one done. And obviously once we've pressed those into place, before we take that to our sewing machine, we can then remove that backing paper. You can see there that I've got all those pieces into place and I have stitched around them. So then I've gone ahead and taken just my ruler and just a deep brown polychromo pencil. That's an ordinary pencil, and I have just drawn a line up the center, and then I've stitched in a darker brown all the way down and then just back again a little, just to increase that little lip line there. And then I've taken that same pencil and I've deepened just at the lower edge of that little mouth there. So just bring it down. You find that a normal polychromo pencil, this is a Faber-Castell, works really well on felt and fabric, and just work that colour in a little, and it just gives the definition there and makes you think there's a little recessed little mouth there. It's a tiny little thing, but it does make a difference. So that's all ready now for that nose. So obviously we can't press the nose on. We've got that fusible webbing on the back though, and that's good because it keeps that felt a little tidier. So I'm simply going to add a tiny spot of clear craft glue and glue that one into place. Now make sure that you don't set that too high. So Yorkies have a fairly short lower lip, and we want to give that nose a little bit of that muzzle, a little bit of length. So we're just going to drop that down, get it into the right position, just leave yourself, it's probably about 6 millimeters below, and get that one glued into place. We'll let that dry. Then you can either stitch around it in the same way on the machine, or you can do what I'm probably going to do. I will just throw a couple of stitches over that template just to cover that little nose and make sure it stays in place. So once you have all of your facial features in place there, we're just going to take our back headpiece, and you can see that we've got little marks there on your pattern piece. You might want to just transfer them to the back there so that you can see, but what we're going to do is put those two right sides together. Make sure it's very well lined up, it's important for the ears. And then we're going to stitch from that mark right the way around to the mark on the other side, and just make sure you're nice and close to that edge there. So keep that seam really small and make sure that you're really back and forth on the start and finish. So we're just going to be turning through just that lower section of the head. Okay, so there you can see that I've turned that head through now, push those seams out, and you've got that very sweet little Yorkie lower jaw there. And then what I've done is I've just flattened that, matched up, make sure those ears are really well lined up, and I've just stitched from the top of the corner of the ear there down to the mark where we just started our seam. So we're just closing off that section on both sides. Make sure you use a coordinating thread there. And so now the only part we're going to be filling is the center part of the head. But before we do that, these earpieces are open, but remember that we've got fusible webbing on them. So now I'm going to go to my iron, and I'm very carefully only going to fuse those ear sections closed. And there's a reason for that. We're going to do something a little bit tricky with the ear here. So make sure they're nicely fused, particularly this little lobe here. And so now I've got those little ears fused together, and I can add my filling through that little top opening, which is quite small, but it's going to keep all of that filling in there. So forceps are best for this if you have them. Open up the top of that head, and I'm going to tuck my filling in there. And I do like this to be nice and firm, particularly around the lower chin area of the head. And we need a reasonable amount of filling in this head because we're going to be adding the eyes, and we want there to be enough filling that we've got we can add some depth to those eyes. So I'm definitely going to be using my wool felting needle to help me pack this filling in. But it's really just a matter of making sure you fill out those little cheeks and keep filling right up to the top. Go in there with your wool felting needle to pack it in all nicely, and then we will move on to our next step. So once we have that little head filled, you can see that's quite firm there. We're just going to go ahead and close the top of that head. Now the way we're going to do that is I'm using my extra strong thread. You can use your embroidery thread or perhaps some pearl thread. And we're going to be sewing that tiny little blanket stitch. I'm going to start about halfway up the ear. So we're just going to be sewing the tip of the ear together down, and you're going to pull that head section across as we sew across the top of the head, around this tip of the ear and to halfway there again. So it's the same blanket stitch that we used before on the body when we were sewing that little foot section. You can see again, and I'm using a thread colour that matches the gold part of my Yorkie, but you can coordinate it if you like. You can contrast it, whatever you like. You can see I'm just going to keep those stitches nice and small. So our next step is to add the eyes. So I've got my tiny little buttons, and your size of your thread and needle will depend on the size of your buttons. Now mine are really small, but they do need to be small. So we're going to start coming in from behind. I've got a knot in the end. I'm using just a single strand of my extra strong thread in black because it's the only thread and size that will actually fit through my tiny buttonholes. So I've made 2 marks there. Now remember, when you go to choose your eye placement, that those eyes are going to pull in. So make sure you don't set them too close together. You want them to pull in independently of that muzzle section there. Make those marks, and then, as I said, come in from behind. Got a knot in the end of my thread, and come out right on that mark. And I'm going to come in from the behind that button, pull that one through, back into that other side. And then we're going to go back in right close there and come out again at the back and pull that one through. Now what we're going to be able to do is really get some great tension there to pull that eye in and sink that eye. I don't know if you can see that, it's quite pulled in there. So you need to keep your thumb on there, keep that tension up, and sew a couple of anchoring stitches on the back so that that tension does hold. And then you just repeat and do exactly the same thing with the other eye and make sure that they're equally pulled in. And there we go, you can see that those eyes are sunk really well, and you can go ahead and add a little bit of colour just around that lower edge of that eye if you like. You probably really can't see that on mine, but just sets those eyes back even more, only on the outer and lower edge. There we go, so that's given a lovely little expression. If the eyes just sit on top, you don't get that lovely sweet expressive face. So the next step can be a little bit daunting, but just very, very carefully go about this. So this section here of the ear is nicely fused together, and what we want to do is, because we've got all of this bulk, it's there for a reason, I'm going to take my very, very sharp scissors and I'm going to just snip straight little close together cuts. Now don't go too close. The last thing you want to have happen is that you snip one of these little ear pieces off, and just rotate as you go. And we're just going to create what is like a little bit of felt fringing there. Just get smaller as you go up. Don't snip your threads on that lovely blanket stitching, and we can just pull those out, and it's just broken up that line. and given us that lovely little feathered look at the side there. So I'm going to repeat the same on the other side, and then we're going to add this lovely little face to the body. So to add this head to the body, we're going to need, first of all, we're going to need our button that we've got ready. You're going to need a doubled strand of extra strong thread on a longer needle, and we are going to be popping that one on with our button at the back, and we're going to travel through all of the layers, through the head, back again through the other side of the button. So where we situate that button, we want to see about 1/2 centimetre showing at the top of the button. So you just want to dive in. Once you've got that centralised, dive in, make sure you're taking your needle straight through. You don't want to be coming at an angle. Straight through into one side. We want to leave those tail ends hanging. That button will just sit there, we don't want that to come off. And then we're going to take a nice big bite, and it's central on the head with this little pattern. It really does work well. Now we're going to just take a big chunk and a big stitch across. And you want to make sure that's nicely parallel and in the centre. So we've travelled across there, turn him around. Then we're going to go back in the other side of the front. Going to come out the other side, pull up our button. Just make sure you're coming out evenly. Okay, come out through the other hole of the button. This looks more complicated than it is. It's just tricky to show you on camera. But it is the simplest way to add a little head. Right, so what you'll end up with, you can see there, are your 2 double threads and your little head, which is basically on a little double strand that pulls it in. Now what we need to do now is compress all of those layers, and we're going to be tying off that head. So what you want to do now is have a look at your little dog and make sure that the head position is exactly where you want it. It's easy enough to pull it all out again and reposition it if you want it to sit a little higher or lower. Once you've got that position right, you just need to pull those thread ends together, keep that tension up, knot that off at least 4 times and snip your thread ends. So there you can see that has that little head all pop there in place, nice and secure. So my final step is I'm going to add this little top knot bow, and I've given you the template to make up a simple one out of felt. Like I said, my little Yorkie Teddy, he used to always wear a plain red bow. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fold that piece of felt in the center, then I'm going to fold it back on itself just to create that little tucked in bow. And with my red, I'm just going to stitch that through so that holds right in the center. So that has my little bow ready, pulled down in the center, and now I have a doubled strand of my extra strong thread, and I've just come in from behind. I've left tail ends hanging there, come in from behind, and I'm just going to wrap around that bow there. And then all I need to do is gather up that lower side and tie it up from behind and knot that off, and that's a perfect little Yorkie bow. Of course you can add anything you like there. You could also hot glue little diamantes and all sorts of things there. So I'm just going to get that one tied off. And so there you go, that completes our gorgeous little Yorkie, and quite quick to make up. And if you've enjoyed making that one, have a little look at my little Westie. Don't they look fabulous together? Beautiful little gift to make, and really tiny. I may be small, but I am mighty. So I'd love to know how many of you have little Yorkies, because we don't see many of them in Oz. and when I had mine, he was actually quite rare. So tell me in the comments if you have a Yorkie, if you're lucky enough to live with a Yorkie, or perhaps you have had one in the past, and tell me their names. I'd love to hear all about them. So I hope you've enjoyed making this little one, and I would love to see some little pairs of these together. And I can't wait to see what you're going to do. You can add little bandanas, all sorts of gorgeous little things, maybe even a little coat, but just have fun with it. So thank you all for joining me today and making this little one up. Wouldn't this be a fabulous gift for somebody who goes to work who has a Yorkie or a little tiny dog? Change the colours up. And you can make all sorts of little tiny toy breeds. I'm looking forward to seeing them all. Come and join our Facebook group, everybody. I've put the link in the description box below for you. Come and see what everybody else is making with my patterns, and you can share yours, and then we can encourage you along. It's a very positive, encouraging group, so come and join us. In the meantime, make sure that you follow me on Instagram. If you haven't subscribed, I don't know why. Come and join us. There's so much going on, and you keep getting all of these free patterns. I'm putting up something new every week, and I hope you're enjoying them all. I'm certainly enjoying hearing from you all, so you can chat to me on Instagram, or you can check out our board, You Made It, on Pinterest. Follow Lisa Pay on Pinterest, and you can see, again, I put posts up of what all of you are doing with my patterns. You're so clever with all of your pattern tweaks and enlarging them and making them a little bit smaller and adding all sorts of bits and pieces. I love to see you all being creative. So everybody have a fantastic creative week. Everybody stay safe, and most of all, remember, when all those great things come to you in your day, make sure that you share them and you pay them forward. And until next time, it's hooroo from me.